Julian Assange. Save a man from a living death.
We've been gathering here outside Australia House in the rain today as an event that's being held by the Australia-UK organisation, and it's a conversation between Alexander Downer, who was the High Commissioner here in London for many years, and William Hague, who used to be the Foreign Minister. And this is happening at a time where the Australian journalist Julian Assange has been kept in a Category A prison in Belmarsh here in London, facing rendition to the United States and fighting that rendition. Now, for me, it's pretty amazing to come back here, because in December 2010, myself and some Australian academics, activists and artists occupied this foyer here and protest of Australia's lack of advocacy for Julian when he was initially in Wandsworth Prison here in London, where he was detained without charge. So it's amazing to think that it's been roughly 8.5 years of the persecution of Julian Assange. And these two men who are in conversation tonight were largely responsible, played a significant role in that persecution. Alexander Downer failed to do his job, which is primarily to protect the human rights of Australians abroad here in the UK. And there's a history of that. When you look at the failure of Australia to advocate and demand due process for David Hicks when he was in Guantanamo, when you look at my own experience imprisoned in the United States, at best it is negligence. At worst, it is sacrificing an Australian citizen, in this case Julian Assange, on the altar of empire. And when you put this in the context of Australia and its history, is that we've been roughly involved in about over a dozen wars in our history, in the white Australian history. And only one could be described as defensive, the war against the Japanese in the Pacific in World War II. The other wars, we have routinely in every generation sacrificed young men and women on the altar of empire. We tend to seek our security in serving in the past the British, presently the American Empire, and possibly the future, will be serving the Chinese Empire. And part of that servicing is putting the bodies and the mental health and the physical health of young Australians in the military in these wars that have nothing to do with the defence of Australia. And now in this case, we're sacrificing a journalist and a publisher, Julian Assange, who's exposed the nature of modern warfare, exposed the criminality that was exercised in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And here's like a human sacrifice, a kind of tithe by Australian politicians and those with power to the United States. And you know, the jobs of William Hague and Alexander Downer, who are in conversation here tonight, is if you seek power, you seek positions in a liberal democracy, your priority should be defending the health of that democracy, defending things like free speech, the right to publish freely, the right to journalists to practice their trade. And William Hague, immediately when Julian went to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, threatened to break all international protocol and international law by invading that embassy, and was eventually called off from doing that. And Alexander Downer, as I said before, failed to do his primary job, which was to represent the human rights of Australians in trouble abroad. Literally, you'd get more, and I don't resent this, for people, but you'd get more backup if you're in trouble for heroin in Thailand than you'd ever get if you're in trouble for political reasons with the United States. The Australian government will serve you up, whether it be Labor or Liberal. So I call upon all elements of civil society, whether it be the churches, those in the media, fellow journalists, academics and artists to begin to advocate and defend Julian Assange, because this is as being pointed out and people are beginning to realise in the United States, is not only the end of Julian, it's the end of journalism and free media and free press. And we know, being from Queensland, Julian and I, that the lack of transparency naturally leads to corruption. And so, yeah, thank you.